Good morning, everyone. Hiya. Lovely to be back. Can you believe it's 2022? And 2022 means that it's our election year, which is very exciting. So, just giving people a bit of a chance to get on board here and join us for our first Tea with Tink for the new year. I hope everybody had some downtime over the Christmas New Year period. I know it was tough for many of us. I don't know about you guys, I did have COVID in my family. My eldest son James came down with COVID. Thankfully he was the only person in my family to go through it. We managed to keep him isolated. And I had my booster shot yesterday. I must confess I'm a little bit sluggish today, but very much looking forward to our conversation today. I have an incredible person joining me for Tea with Tink today, the amazing Dr. Arnagretta Hunter, and I'm just waiting for her to request to join the meeting because she'll be here any minute now. But how was your summer? Did you get away? Did you have a chance to get some downtime? I think the last couple of years have been incredibly challenging for all of us, really, in terms of having to adapt to what I actually think is going to be a new normal. So I really hope that people manage to have some time off. Now, I think I've got Arnagretta here. Hi, Tommy. Hi, guys. So good to see everybody. And here she is. Hi.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Arnagretta?
Yeah, not too bad. Hoping that the internet keeps its cool. So, yep.
Yeah, well, that's the modern world, isn't it? I think we all live in that state of will it actually work? Will it not work? Thank you so much for joining me this morning. Arnagretta. As I said, I had my booster shot for COVID-19 yesterday, so I've got a little bit of brain fog, I must admit, this morning. So I apologise in advance if I ask silly questions or, I take a while to follow along. But I'm so excited to have you joining me here this morning. For everyone that's watching, I had the privilege of actually listening to Arnagretta talk at the Sydney Opera House 2 weekends ago. There was a performance art installation where there was a performance artist suspended on an inverted iceberg, effectively hung out over the Sydney Harbour Bay. And at the time that the performance art piece was going on, organisers had also arranged to have incredible speakers like Dr. Hunter talk for 10 minutes on the things that they really felt we needed to be focused on, the opportunities that lay ahead of us to address what's currently going on with the climate. So as soon as I heard her speak, I was like, I have to speak to you again, and we have to create this opportunity for other people to hear your message. So Arnagretta, I thought what I'd do is if I start, so everybody knows Arnagretta is a trained cardiologist, and she is currently a member of the Australian Institute. I'm going to check Climate, Energy and Disaster Solutions at ANU. But Arnagretta, can you give people here joining us today a little bit of background on yourself and how you've come to find yourself in the position that you are with the ANU?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for inviting me to join in today. It's really exciting to be here, so I'm really very much appreciative of the time. I'm Arnagretta Hunter. I'm a cardiologist, and I'm the Human Futures Fellow at the Australian National University, which is one of the most interesting titles I've had in my career. I trained as a cardiologist, so I've been working as a doctor now for 20 or so years, and I look after all sorts of different health conditions in the context of working as a cardiologist. There's a broad patients that I look after. And it was a couple of years ago where I was realising that the themes that came up in my consultation world there's a number of themes that came up in conversations regularly. I enjoy the preventative focus and actually maintaining concepts of well-being and trying to keep people as healthy as possible. And so with my patients, I quite often talk about food, and I talk about exercise, and I talk about spending time with friends and family. And so I remember looking out the window one day as I was consulting, thinking, oh, wow, look, one of the health policy areas that would be really powerful for improving the health and wellbeing of the communities that I'm part of is making sure that our urban infrastructure and urban design is as good as possible. So we've got lovely green spaces and good footpaths and nice infrastructure to spend time being a little bit more active. So the design things that might improve active transportation and that decision to get on a bike or to walk distances which we can achieve rather than using our cars. And we know that that has tremendous health benefits. And so I sort of fell from that interest in public policy areas outside medicine into climate change, because it becomes obvious that you can't ignore it. When you think about the built environment and thinking about cities and the urban environment, it's the increase in extreme weather events. And one of my fascinations, well, it's not fascinating, but it is quite an interesting area, is heat. And it's an issue we know in Sydney, it's an issue around the country in regional centres, and unfortunately I don't think there will be parts of Australia that avoid contending with problems with extreme heat. And so it's our local environment that's part of our solutions framework, I think, for contending with that increased extreme weather and the temperatures we might see in summer. And so, yeah, I started working in a couple of the organisations, Doctors for the Environment and the Climate and Health Alliance, trying to work on communicating and researching and thinking about this relationship between our health and well-being and the lives that we lead much more broadly.
And I want to I'd love to pick you up on something you just said then, because I think you don't often hear people have conversations around our built environment and human health. I mean, we all know it. We all, assume that if you have green space you can hang out in, you're going to do it. But I only recently learnt about the whole concept of these urban heat zones, and the fact that actually here in the seat that I'm, working to represent in Canberra, which is the federal seat of North Sydney, we have two particularly intense urban heat zones, and they are the Chatswood CBD area, which I believe is one of the hottest zones in the city of Sydney, and also the North Sydney CBD area, which you wouldn't necessarily think because, it's close to a water's edge. So when you talk about that urban design, I mean, it really is right from the get-go, isn't it, in terms of how town planners are planning what's happening, and also consumers, what we're enabling or allowing to happen around us.
Yeah, so look, maybe just thinking a little bit about how we consider our health and well-being. And I know for doctors and for health professionals, we're trained in the biology of disease. We look at cells and we look at cellular interactions. We do amazing, extraordinary work with life-saving sorts of technology and drugs and deliverables and those sorts of things. And, you can only have to look at the coronavirus drug, the vaccine, particularly the vaccines that have been developed through this pandemic, to really, as a profound example of how important and how remarkable the work done in the biology of health is. But using coronavirus again, we're also aware that broader social context in which we live. In health, we talk about the social determinants of health. So where we live and the sort of work that we do, our socioeconomics, those sorts of things have quite a profound influence on our health and well-being. And when I think about cardiovascular disease, the biology is really fascinating. And we do spend a lot of time thinking about disease processes, diabetes, high blood pressure, etc. But the social determinants of health, where we live, what sort of work we do, what our access to resources might be, how good our relationships are, those sorts of things have as much of an influence on whether we will become ill or whether we'll maintain a good health for a long period of time. That's been the model that we've really focused on in health and wellbeing, I think, for decades. And over the last couple of years, we're increasingly beginning to recognise the environment as another element. It's that third element, the biology, society, and then the environment. So it's the air that we breathe, it's the food that we eat, it's the water that we need to survive, and then it's where and how we live. It's the cities and the spaces in which we live. And that's my model for defining the environmental determinants of health. And again, with COVID, the air that we breathe. And so we went through that black summer experience, and I know North Sydney was badly affected through periods of hazardous air pollution at that time. And I'm based most of the time in the ACT, where we had really a summer from hell. It was apocalyptic much of the time. But I suspect many of us hadn't really considered air pollution as a variable for our health and well-being up until the Black Summer experience. And then it's really flowed on as we've increasingly appreciated the air side of our coronavirus pandemic. So I do think these environmental determinants and the places that we live and the way in which we interact with our environment, we've had lots of lessons in this in the last couple of years, and it's a real opportunity because the positives here for change, for improving our health and well-being, are so significant. If we changed our relationship with burning fossil fuel in cities, about mostly, I'm thinking about cars. We know that urban air pollution, PM2.5, will influence child development. It increases the risks of childhood asthma. In adults, we know it has an influence in heart disease, arrhythmias, all sorts of different elements. So we can make quite a compelling argument now to change our relationship with burning fossil fuel in cities, petrol mostly, to improve health and well-being. And I think that's some of the extraordinary opportunities we can see taking a climate change lens into the health paradigm.
And I think, well, from my perspective, I think it's a really important message for us to consider here in North Sydney as well, because we are a hub of industry. We're a community of thinkers and doers and feelers. And there is no doubt that there is more and more pressure in terms of the density of housing that we have in this area, because people want to live close to where they work or, be around good schools. I think in particular, one of the things I'm concerned about our electorate is that we've always enjoyed, and in fact, my area is known as the leafy Lower North Shore, and before I even moved here, I knew that's what it was called. But in fact, I think it's worth calling out to people watching today. There are a number of infrastructure projects that are currently planned, which will literally see thousands of trees removed from our community. So one of the most pressing ones is the Northern Beaches Tunnel, which is a project that was originally conceived back in 1960. So, this project is, 60 years old, and we're still, our bureaucracy is trying to push this project through. From my perspective, it's a disaster. There's no public transport planned into it. It is a vehicle tunnel. There's no filtration on the stacks, and I just think that what we're looking at here is an opportunity as a community to actually stand up and say, no, we don't want that. We want to understand what are the public transport options that can be reviewed here, and how do we create a project that actually is planning for the future out to 50 years. Not just what we need in terms of our immediacy in this immediate environment, but 50 years from now, how will people be transporting themselves, and what can we be creating? I think the federal government plays a really important role in that, because while it is a state government project, the federal government inevitably steps in with funding assistance. So I think that leadership opportunity is there for a federal politician. But I want to talk to you more about that, because obviously you're based in Canberra. And when you look nationally, people may not know, but the ACT is actually one of the leading areas in our country when it comes to pursuing and establishing renewable and sustainable energy. You and I spoke on the weekend about the fact that, the ACT, it's 100% renewable energy, is it not now?
It is, yep.
It has one of the fastest take-ups of electric vehicles, I understand. Yet there is this concept called Scope 3 emissions, which is something that the community is trying to get their head around. Can you talk to us a little bit about what Scope 3 emissions are?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I usually have an annual favourite report of the year from some sort of organisation, and in 2020 it was the Bushfire Royal Commission, or the Royal Commission to National Natural Disaster Arrangements, which, if you haven't read, is also pretty interesting reading. But last report of note was the Scope 3 report that came from the Commissioner for Sustainability and the Environment, an ACT legislative role. And it's the first time a government organisation has looked at Scope 3 emissions. When we talk about climate change, we often talk about energy and the need to transition our energy system to renewable energy. And we talk about transportation, as I was just doing before, about the burning of petrol and the burning of diesel and the electrification advantages in our transport fleet. But Scope 3 emissions is everything else. And I still play this game called Turn Off the Tap, where you imagine, it's a thought experiment, and there's sort of no right or wrong here, but you wake up in the morning and all the fossil fuel burning around the world has gone. We've stopped burning fossil fuel. We're really working very hard to prevent carbon pollution. And so around the world, every single bit of fossil fuel has stopped being burnt. What an interesting thought experiment. So you get up and in the ACT, because it's renewable energy, you can still turn the lights on, and that's because it's renewable energy. Now, maintenance of that system is an interesting question, because often the maintenance process will have some carbon pollution. But you might, get up and do some exercise, go for a run on some of those beautiful beaches in northern Sydney, or wherever you are. And so you're putting on some clothing and shoes. And that clothing and those shoes, they have a carbon footprint, and that carbon footprint for those things comes from the primary production, the cotton that's been harvested, or the manufacturing of lycra, And then the factories that run, and they're often running in countries where there's less renewable energy being used, and so there's a carbon footprint there. And then if you're buying imported goods, there's a carbon footprint associated with the transportation. And there's some fantastic work being done on how to decarbonise that global trade or the global transportation, but it's not there yet. And so everything we buy that's imported has a carbon footprint. And so what are we going to do when the shoes run out, or I've got a hole in my T-shirt? What am I going to do next? And you can play this game for the whole day. So you go and have a shower, and you're looking at the soap and the shampoo and the towels, and all of the clothes that you might wear to go off and do whatever you're going to do for the day. I have to say, one of the points where I get anxious is I walk down to the kitchen and the coffee, and I look at the coffee in the coffee beans. And I know we make some great coffee in Australia, but it's a very small part of our coffee consumption. And for those of us who are caffeine dependent, our coffee has a carbon footprint. And so for us thinking about the impacts of that and how we can reduce that. So net zero means balancing carbon pollution against a carbon reduction, so often greening space or growing carbon. And so we really need to start to have quite explicit conversations about that. So this is a really interesting project in the ACT because we care a lot about about climate change. We're a society and a community which is deeply interested in getting the best results for the planet. A lot of people care about the environmental issues that are unfolding. And of course, we've had the experience of bushfires, both in the Canberra bushfire and then more recently. So it's something that is front of mind in the ACT. And yet when this report, the analysis was done for this report, we actually have the second highest carbon footprint in the country, which is really quite amazing. You know, we've got 100% renewable energy. And so even when you take that out of the equation, our carbon footprint per capita, per individual, is still quite high. We're second to the Northern Territory. And when you take out transportation, then actually we have the highest carbon footprint. And we have the highest carbon footprint really because of our consumption, because of the stuff that we buy and use. And it can be used and throw away, or it can be used and reuse and recycle. And so there's this extraordinary opportunity in that whole conversation. That we often start to feel a little bit guilty about the things that we use, our enjoyment of French cheese, or our shoe obsession, or the need for a T-shirt that doesn't have holes in it. And there really isn't a perfect solution to this, but there are extraordinary opportunities in that conversation around Scope 3 for us to think about what should be driving us as a community. How is the consumption of stuff, is that an essential part of what we do? Are there ways of running circular economies and reusing, recycling, repurposing? I'm noticing that they actually in the footwear industry, in running shoes, if you're into a jog in the morning, there is quite a lot of work being done on how we can do that. So there's all these extraordinary opportunities for businesses and rethinking and redoing things. But it is important, I think it's such an important conversation for us to think about climate change, not just about where that particular electron comes from when you turn on the light switch, but it's a whole of system thing, okay? It's the impacts of climate change will affect all elements of our life, and the way that we're often perpetuating carbon pollution through so many parts of our life. And if we're given opportunities to make choices, I have a tremendous amount of faith in our capacity to make better choices if we're given good quality information. And that's where the role for having intelligent, community-minded, independent candidates representing and then engaging with their communities, it can be absolutely transformative. So a really important part of this is getting people like you elected.
Thank you, Arnagretta. I want to come back because you and I had a really interesting conversation. You know, we are of a similar age. I think we grew up in a similar era, and we talked about the fact that when we were growing up, you know, you had a list of things that you aspired to own, you know, so you'd have a list that you actually had for birthday presents you were hoping to get, or a list, you know, that you'd send to Santa for Santa's presents. But the reality is, over the course of the last 40 years, we've seen a massive change in consumption patterns, and there really is that whole concept of delayed gratification is something that is not experienced very often for a large percentage of people. You and I talked about our teenage children, you know, and the fact that I literally had this conversation with my 14-year-old, I don't think she'll mind me sharing this, about, you know, she was talking about a necklace that she'd found that she really wanted, and my response to her was, well, let's put that on your birthday list. Now her birthday's in May, So it's really not that far away. But her response to me was, well, but I want it now. And I'm like, well, no, let's leave it till May. It gives you something to wait for. And then we had a really interesting conversation around what is it about wanting it now and the buzz that you get out of purchasing it now. So from that point when you make a decision to then taking a course of action, what is it that you're actually looking for? And can we find more space in our lives to work out, is there another way to get that feeling that doesn't involve immediate purchase or doesn't involve, and I mean, we talked about it for quite a while. You were going to repeat the conversation, I think, in your house. How did you go?
We've been talking about it, and in my family, instantaneous gratification is the default position. I want this, I'm going to go and get it, or why can't I have it now? And it's a really interesting conversation to have, and I really hope that many of the people who get a chance to watch this take your example and have that conversation at home. Can we make the world a better place by changing our patterns of gratification? Because the instantaneous gratification, we know often in the health context may not be as good for us. That the food decisions, for example, of wanting something and then eating it, that has some downsides for many of us, myself included. And so training ourselves or having explicit conversations around the way in which we seek happiness, and that was another conversation we had. I think we can talk about happiness. I think we need to talk about happiness. I think happiness and joy and community collaboration is actually a tremendously important part of solving climate change, of addressing both the challenge we have in carbon pollution as well as fostering a fabulous society for the decades ahead. The opportunities here for us to work together are quite remarkable. And gratification is a very important part of that conversation, absolutely.
Well, and I like, again, one of the other examples you shared with me earlier was the Women's March that you were part of last year. And, you really observed that there was this, and correct me if I paraphrase incorrectly, but there was this rising, sense of anger and frustration, and people showed up in the thousands on the front lawn of Parliament House and raised their fists in the air and kind of said, fix it, how are you going to fix this? But your observation on it is while that's a really important call, and there is no doubt that our federal government has things they can be fixing for us with stronger leadership and clear vision, the reality is each and every one of us does have an opportunity to have an immediate impact today, right now, based on the decisions we make for the rest of the day. And you talked about an important opportunity being to put care at the centre of our economy as opposed to consumption. And can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, look, it's an interest. So I think the last 2 years, actually, the economics of COVID, and I'm sure there are other people on the line who are running businesses, who are part of a business structure, who are dealing with the employee-employer relationships, all of those sorts of things are in any of those roles. And there's a tremendous number of people who've also been placed in the last 2 years into situations where there's a real tension between the need for work, going off to work, and the need to caring for yourself, because it's been an extraordinarily stressful time, and we know rates of anxiety and mental health conditions have risen in our community in the last year or so, or whether you're caring for a member of the family because of the disrupted lives that we're leading. And so it's a time to challenge, I think, some of our conventional economic approaches, that we have to be doing stuff, selling stuff, making stuff, and then giving, that consumptive pathway, that we can do that in a way which is better for our planet and better for our community. And we can potentially use caring as a strategy to address this. So I've got this hashtag value caring that I share with a friend at ANU. We've been talking about it for a while. And it's a really interesting, again, it's a thought experiment. If we're making decisions about transportation, making decisions about work, decisions about how we structure aged care, if we're making a decision about whether to knock down trees to build another large road in our community, we can use a caring principle. And caring, for me, has three elements. Caring means having time to care for yourself, time and resources to care for yourself. Caring means time and resources to care for those around you if you're in a position of engagement, so for either family or community or the people on your street, or caring for the places that we live. And we can call that caring for the environment, and I'm a bit of a fan of making sure we look after our natural environment, but it can just simply be being part of that community infrastructure design and maintenance and care. And it hasn't been a priority. It's not part of our decision making. It's the economic impact which really drives the decision making that we make, particularly at a government level. But we don't have to. That's not written in stone. And so we've got opportunities really to flip that narrative so that we can put the joy and meaning of life at the centre of the decisions that we make. And what an extraordinary opportunity that would be. And, there's some fantastic conversations about how you can actually use that focus for economic advantage. That doesn't have to be a bad thing in terms of the conventional economics, but it really does change the way in which we might make decisions. We might make decisions to remove the cars from our urban environment, particularly from around schools and from busy walkable streets. We might make some decisions to improve our active transport network. We might make some decisions about working maybe half a day or 1 day a week less and giving people more flexibility with where and how they work so that they can take care of themselves, take care of their family and take care of the world around you. It's an extraordinary opportunity. And has there ever been a moment where we're open to change? I think it's a complicated time for us, but finding a positive framework for us to make the changes that will benefit us is one of the challenges the opportunities that is present at the moment.
I love that. I love what you've just said there. It's about finding the framework that enables us to achieve and experience the lives that we want to experience. And it's interesting, having worked in business for 30 odd years, I noticed the switch over time in business from reporting on a purely financial profit loss basis to eventually moving into a triple bottom line reporting, an awareness that a business is more than just making money. And I can't help but feel, as you just said, we're at a really important time here in Australia in that we have an opportunity to actually mature as a nation and decide how we are going to move forward and what that is going to look like. And I think the thing that frustrates me at the moment in our current politic environment is that it doesn't seem to be a conversation about long-term vision or deliberate decisions about who we are as a nation. It's literally a game of finger pointing. So don't look at me, look at her, look at him. And I think Arnagretta, I never meant to put my hand up to run for politics. I'm doing it because the community literally tapped me on the shoulder and said, we want somebody to speak our truth. And I think since I've had that opportunity to start to get involved in conversations just like this one and to listen and learn and understand, there is such a bigger truth out there than what we are currently exposed to as a country. And, I think today, on the eve of Australia Day, what an amazing opportunity it would be for us to call ourselves out as a nation and go, right, what do we look like for the next 60,000 years? Because we have 60,000 years worth of history. So what does our next 60,000 look like? And, I'm just really grateful there are people like you out there who are providing us with these opportunities to think and stop and think, and asking us actually to create the space in our day to stop and think and make some conscious decisions. It's about conscious living, and that would be a pretty extraordinary thing to be able to do rather than just run on the rat race.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's about happiness, it's about joy, it's about the meaningful life, and I think that's what matters for all of us. Yeah.
Fantastic. Arnagretta, thank you so much for giving me your time this morning. This conversation has been so insightful for me, and I feel like yet again you've offered me things to consider in my own life. Like as you said, none of us are perfect. We're all just doing what we're doing, and a lot of us are doing it because it's the way we've always done it. I guess my sense of where we are at this point in time is that we have an opportunity to choose to do things differently going forward. And the reality is we need to make that choice. The decisions we make in the next 3 years through to the end of 2030, they will decide what sort of world our children inherit and our grandchildren inherit. And, I think it was actually you who said to me, people look around at what's happening climatically now and talk about these extreme weather events. It's really important that we recognise that what we're experiencing now was laid down 20 years ago. These are from the emissions that were released 20 years ago. So if we fast forward now and look at what we're doing today, our decisions will impact what happens in 20 years. And I think it's really important that we step up into that opportunity and decide we will do better.
Absolutely. No, all the best with your campaign. Okay, I really hope that you are successful in North Sydney.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been great to be. Thank you.
Lovely to speak to you. To everyone who joined today, thank you. Thank you for your time. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this conversation. Arnagretta is an incredibly inspirational person, I think, and somebody who does provide us with some insight into the things we can be doing potentially on a day-to-day basis. The reality is, as Arnagretta said, this is a whole of system solution that we need to pursue. So there is no doubt we need to have conversations around our roles as individuals, but we do need strong leadership at the federal and state level, and we do need responsible business participating in it as well. So I really look forward to continuing these chats this year through to Tuesday, and I think we should get Arnagretta back on a little bit later in the conversation to see how ACT is going addressing those that third layer of emissions that, to be honest, I don't think we even talk about in the federal North Sydney at the moment. So we've got a long way to go in terms of awareness. Perfect. Thanks so much, Arnagretta. Thanks, everyone. Have a great
Authorised by Kylea Tink, North Sydney, New South Wales.